Freedom Box, a true story from the Underground Railroad by Ellen Levi. Henry Brown wasn't sure how old he was. Henry was a slave, and slaves weren't allowed to know their birthdays. Henry and his brothers and sisters worked in a big house where the master lived. Henry's master had been good to Henry and his family, but Henry's mother knew things would change. Do you see the leaves? Those leaves blowing in the wind, they are torn from their trees like slave children torn from their family. Most of our leaves got torn already because it's been very windy this time of the season. One morning, the master called for Henry and his mother. They climbed the wide staircase. The master lay in bed with only his head above the quilt. He was very ill. He beckoned them to come closer. Some slaves were freed by their owners. Henry's heart beat fast, beating fast. Okay. Maybe the master would set him free! Ow, ouch. But the master said, "You are a good worker, Henry. I am giving you to my son. You must obey him and never tell a lie." Henry nodded, but he didn't say thank you. That would have been a lie. Later that day, Henry watched a bird soar high above the trees. "Free bird, happy bird," Henry thought. But Henry said goodbye to his family. He looked across the field. The leaves swirled in the wind. I don't have a leaf nearby. Henry worked in his new master's factory. He was good at his job. Do not tear the tobacco leaf, the boss yelled at the new boy. He poked the boy with a stick. I don't know, maybe it was my imagination stick. If you made a mistake, the boss would beat you up. Henry was lonely. One day, he met Nancy, who was shopping for her mistress. They walked and talked and agreed to meet again. Henry felt like singing, but slaves didn't dare to sing in the streets. Instead, he hummed all the way. Oopsies. Months later, Henry asked Nancy to be his wife. When both their masters agreed, Henry and Nancy were married. Soon there was a little baby, then another, and another. Henry knew they were very lucky. They lived together, and even though they had different masters, but Nancy was worried. Her master had lost a great deal of money. "I'm afraid he will sell our children," she said. Henry sat very still. Henry worked hard all morning. He tried to forget what Nancy had said. His friend James came into the factory. He whispered to Henry, "Your wife and your children just got sold at the slave market." "No," cried Henry. Henry couldn't move. He couldn't think. He couldn't work. Twist that tobacco. The boss poked Henry. Henry twisted the tobacco leaves. His heart twist in his chest. At lunchtime, Henry rushed to the center of the town. A large group of slaves was tied together. The owner shouted at them. Henry looked for his family. "Father, father!" Henry watched his children disappear down the road. Where was Nancy? He saw her the same moment she saw him. When he wiped away his tears, Nancy too was gone. It's very windy. Henry no longer sang. He couldn't hum. He went to work, and at night he ate supper and went to bed. Henry tried to think of happy times, but all he could see were the carts carrying away everyone he loved. Henry knew he would never see his family again. Many weeks passed. One morning, Henry heard singing. A little bird flew out of a tree into the open sky. Henry thought about being free, but how? As he lifted a crate, he knew the master. He knew the answer. He asked James and Dr. Smith to help him. Dr. Smith was a white man who thought slavery was wrong. They met early the next day at an empty White House. Henry arrived with a box. I will mail myself to a place where there are no slaves, he said. James started at the box, then at Henry. What if you cough and someone hears you? I will cover my mouth and hope, Henry said. Okay, this is the part I've been waiting for. Okay, but I'm going to show you at the end, because we're reading the book right now. Dr. Smith wrote on the box to William H. Johnson, Arch Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Henry would be delivered to friends in Philadelphia. Then he printed on the crate in big letters, "This side with care," because he doesn't want to get hurt. Henry needed an excuse to stay home or work. The work boss should think he ran off. James pointed to Henry, sore finger, but Henry knew that it wasn't bad enough. He opened a bottle of oil of vitriol. "No!" cried James. Henry poured it on his hand and burned his skin to the bone. To the bone! Now the boss would have to let him stay home. Dr. Smith bandaged Henry's hand. Ooh, they're usually like white like a mummy. They are good to meet the next morning at 4 o'clock. The sun was not yet up. Then Henry climbed into the box. "Ready," he said. James nailed down the lid. Dr. Smith and James drove to the station. The railway clerk tripped the box over and nailed the paper on the bottom. Dr. Smith begged the clerks to be careful, but they didn't listen. They threw the box into the baggage car. Hours passed. Henry was lifted up and thrown again upside down. He heard waves splashing. This must be the steamboat headed for Washington, D.C. The ship rode smoothly, but Henry was still upside down. Blood rushed to his head. His face got hot. His eyes ashed. He thought his head would burst, but he was afraid to move. Someone might hear him. "I'm tired of standing," said someone. "Why don't we move that box and sit on it?" said another. Henry held his breath. They could be talking about his box. Henry was pushed the box. Scrape the deck. We're on the deck and I can't really scratch it right now. Now he was on his right side, now on his left, and suddenly right side up. "What do you think is in here?" The first man said the first man. "Mail, I guess," said the other, cause boys in animal language or or they usually say male, because male means boy. I am a male, thought Henry, but I'm not the kind they imagined. Henry was carried off to the steamboat and placed in a railroad car. This time, head up, he fell asleep to the rattling song of the train wheels. He awoke the loud knocking. Henry, are you all right? All right, he answered. The cover was pried open. Henry stretched and stood up. 4 men smiled at him. Welcome to Philadelphia. At last, Henry had a birthday, March 30th, 1849, his first day of freedom, and from that day on, he also had a middle name. Everyone called him Henry Fox Brown. Then,